The grand ballroom of the Upper East Side mansion was a universe of its own, drowning in the cold, brilliant light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and catered delicacies, did little to warm the frigid interactions of New York's elite. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in shimmering couture gowns moved through the space like chess pieces on a marble board, their smiles as polished and brittle as the champagne flutes they held. Every conversation was a transaction, every laugh a carefully calculated investment. It was a spectacle of immense wealth and profound emptiness, a glittering cage where power was the only currency, and genuine human connection was a forgotten language. Beneath the surface of opulent beauty, a current of judgment and existential boredom flowed, making the entire affair feel like a beautiful, hollow performance. Presiding over this gilded theatre was Caleb Hawthorne. At 38, he was the ruthless CEO of a tech empire he had inherited and expanded with a predator's instinct. He stood near the French doors leading to the terrace, a perfect specimen of manufactured success in his bespoke suit, his hair styled with an artist's precision. A permanent, cynical smirk was etched onto his face, a mask for the deep-seated insecurity he refused to acknowledge. His cold, analytical eyes scanned the crowd, not with the warmth of a host, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a colony of insects. Tonight, he was conducting one of his sick little social experiments, and he was waiting for his primary test subject, his housekeeper, Eleanor, whom he had invited purely for the sport of watching her fail to fit in. When Eleanor Vance arrived, she did not scurry in as he had expected. She moved with a quiet dignity that seemed to create its own pocket of silence in the noisy room. She wore a simple vintage gown, impeccably tailored, its deep emerald fabric a stark contrast to the glittering, trendy outfits surrounding her. It was a dress that spoke of history and grace, not of a desperate attempt to belong. Caleb watched her for a moment, his annoyance growing before striding over. "Quite an effort to fit in," he said, his voice a low, condescending drawl meant for the nearby guests to overhear. "And I'm impressed you found something presentable." He expected her to flinch, to stammer, to show the discomfort he so desperately wanted to see, but her gaze remained serene, holding the weight of a past he couldn't begin to fathom. Just as Caleb's smirk widened, ready to deliver another cutting remark, a woman with a cloud of white hair and the unmistakable air of old money approached them. Her name was Beatrice Astor, one of the most respected doyens of New York society, and her face was pale with shock. Her eyes were not on Caleb, but on the delicate silver locket resting against Eleanor's collarbone. "My goodness," Beatrice whispered, her voice cutting through the nearby chatter like a blade. "That locket! It's the Vance family crest. I thought that piece was lost forever." The words hung in the air, electric and undeniable. The ballroom fell silent. The humiliation Caleb had so carefully orchestrated for Eleanor recoiled, striking him with the force of a physical blow. It's in moments like these, when a single truth shatters a world of lies, that you see how fragile manufactured power truly is. If stories about quiet dignity triumphing over loud arrogance matter to you, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue to share these important truths. The silence that fell over the ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shock, replacing the meaningless chatter just moments before. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor, this woman of no consequence, who now held the entire room captive with a simple piece of jewelry. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. The carefully orchestrated humiliation he had planned for her had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He, Caleb Hawthorne, the master of this universe, had been rendered a fool by his own housekeeper. He watched as Beatrice Astor took Eleanor's hand, her expression a mixture of awe and sorrow, and in that moment, Caleb saw not an employee, but a woman shrouded in a history far more profound than his own. He escaped to a deserted terrace, the cold December air a welcome shock to his system. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and calculated moves, was in turmoil. The smirk he wore like armor had vanished, leaving his face feeling naked and exposed. He leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the glittering, indifferent city. It wasn't just the public embarrassment that stung him. It was the unnerving image of Eleanor's composure. She hadn't flinched, hadn't cried, hadn't given him the satisfaction of her pain. She had simply stood there, her quiet dignity a force more powerful than any of his wealth or influence. For the first time in his adult life, Caleb Hawthorne felt profoundly and utterly out of his depth, humbled by a strength he couldn't comprehend. Later, he found her in the mansion's vast, two-story library. She had been asked to wait there, away from the prying eyes of the guests. She wasn't pacing anxiously or weeping into her hands as he might have expected. Instead, she was running her fingers lightly over the spines of leather-bound books, her head tilted in quiet contemplation. The emerald of her dress seemed to absorb the soft lamplight, making her the only point of color and life in the silent, shadowed room. The sight of her, so calm and self-contained amidst the wreckage of his evening, stripped him of his anger. All that remained was a raw, gnawing curiosity that he could no longer ignore. He was a man who hated mysteries, and she was the most compelling one he had ever encountered. He entered the room, slowly, his footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floor. He stopped a few feet away, dropping all pretense, all the layers of cynical armor he used to navigate his world. "Who are you?" The question was quiet, almost a whisper, devoid of its usual condescending edge. It was a genuine plea for an answer. Eleanor turned from the bookshelf, her gaze meeting his directly. There was no fear in her eyes, no anger, only a deep, abiding sadness that seemed to have settled into her very soul. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice clear and steady. The name hung in the air between them, a relic from a bygone era of New York, a name synonymous with honor and, ultimately, with tragedy. She began to tell her story, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a simple statement of fact. She spoke of a childhood filled with warmth and love, of a father who believed in handshakes and a man's word over any contract. She described the catastrophic betrayal by his most trusted business partner, a man he'd considered a brother. One day, the Vance family was a pillar of New York society. The next, they were ruined, their assets frozen, their name dragged through the mud. Her parents, broken by the public shame and financial devastation, passed away within a year of each other, leaving a young Eleanor utterly alone to navigate the ruins of her life, her identity buried under the weight of her family's fall from grace. When she spoke the name of the man responsible for her family's downfall, Marcus Thorne, a cold recognition washed over Caleb. He knew that name intimately. Thorne had been his own father's most venomous rival, a corporate predator known for his scorched earth tactics and complete lack of ethics. Caleb could almost hear his father's voice from years ago, warning him that Thorne was a shark who smelled blood in the water, a man who would destroy anyone to get ahead. Suddenly, Eleanor's personal tragedy intertwined with his own family's history, and the abstract injustice she described became a concrete, familiar evil. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was now, in a strange and unexpected way, a part of his, a decision formed in his mind, immediate and visceral. This was not about charity, it was about a debt. An injustice had been committed by a man his own father had despised. "I'm going to look into this," he declared, the words feeling more like a vow than an offer. He saw her stiffen, a flicker of deep-seated suspicion clouding her serene features. She had survived by being invisible, by trusting no one. And she was not about to become a pawn in another rich man's game. He could see the walls go up, the quiet resilience that had protected her for so long, turning into a formidable defense against his sudden, inexplicable intrusion into her life. He realized this would not be as simple as writing a check. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "I appreciate the thought, but my family's business is my own." Her refusal was not born of pride, but of a fierce self-preservation. She had learned the hard way that dependency was a trap. Caleb had to recalibrate his approach. He couldn't be her savior. She wouldn't allow it. "This isn't about helping you," he said, the idea clarifying as he spoke. "Thorn was an enemy of my family. What he did to your father, he tried to do to mine. Let's call it a partnership. We uncover the truth for both our sakes." He extended a hand, not in a gesture of aid, but of alliance, an invitation to a shared battle. Their investigation began in the quiet of Caleb's home office, a space that was usually reserved for hostile takeovers and ruthless market analysis. Now, it was filled with boxes of old legal documents and financial statements from over a decade ago. Caleb's circle of friends and business associates were baffled. The gossip columns buzzed with speculation about his strange new project and his constant companion, the woman who had once been his housekeeper. They whispered that he was having a breakdown, that his obsession was a sign of weakness. For the first time in his life, Caleb found that he didn't care what they thought. Their world of shallow transactions seemed pale and insignificant compared to the pursuit of this one vital truth. Eleanor was no mere assistant in this endeavor. She was a brilliant and meticulous researcher. Her memories of her father's business, once a source of pain, became their most valuable asset. She could recall names, conversations, and the fine print of deals with astonishing clarity, providing the human context that the dry, dusty documents lacked. They worked side by side, often late into the night, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of shared purpose. In those quiet hours, Caleb saw past the housekeeper and the fallen heiress. He saw a woman of formidable intellect and unbreakable spirit, and she, in turn, began to see the sliver of honor buried deep beneath his cynical exterior, a part of him that was slowly, tentatively coming to life. He found himself fighting a war on two fronts, one against Thorn's hidden crimes, and another against the unfamiliar emotions stirring within himself. He felt an instinct to protect Eleanor from the more painful discoveries, a strange and powerful empathy that ran contrary to every cynical belief he held. His entire philosophy, that all people were motivated by greed and self-interest, was being dismantled by her quiet grace and unwavering integrity. He was changing, and the process was both terrifying and exhilarating. It's truly something to see a person's entire worldview challenged by the simple, quiet dignity of another. If you believe in the power of these transformations, subscribing to our channel helps us bring more such stories to light. Their progress did not go unnoticed. One morning, a key financial analyst who had agreed to speak with them suddenly vanished, his phone disconnected. Then, a secure server containing copies of the Vance family's digital records was mysteriously wiped clean. The final warning came in the form of a direct phone call to Caleb's private line. It was Marcus Thorn. His voice was smooth and amicable, but the threat beneath his words was unmistakable. "You're digging in a graveyard, Hawthorne," Thorn said calmly. "Some things are better left buried." The message was clear. This was no longer an investigation into the past. It was a declaration of war in the present, and they had just made themselves the targets. The boardroom where they met Marcus Thorn was a sterile cage of glass and chrome, 40 floors above the city. It was a space designed to intimidate, with a single, massive mahogany table that felt more like an altar for corporate sacrifice than a place for discussion. Caleb and Eleanor sat on one side, a silent, unified front. He wore a simple dark suit, his usual armor stripped of its arrogance, replaced by a quiet resolve. She was beside him, her posture perfect, her gaze calm and unwavering as she looked out at the sprawling metropolis below. They had brought a single, thin file folder, which lay closed on the table between them. When Thorn entered, he was all predatory smiles and false hospitality, a man so accustomed to winning that he couldn't recognize the moment his world was about to fracture. He saw a lovelorn fool and a nobody, not the architects of his downfall. Thorn began with a dismissive wave of his hand, oozing a condescending charm that had disarmed more powerful men than Caleb. He didn't even look at the file. "Look, Hawthorne, I admire the chivalry, but this is a waste of everyone's time. Whatever fantasy this young woman has spun for you, it's just that a story." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant only for Caleb. "Let's be practical. I'll write you a check. A generous one. You can give her a piece of it, and we can all forget this unfortunate little crusade." He then straightened up, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he finally glanced at Eleanor. "All this effort for a housekeeper. Have you fallen for her, Hawthorne? Is that what this is about?" The words were meant to sting, to reduce their entire endeavor to a rich man's foolish whim. But Caleb didn't flinch. The man who would have once responded with a cutting remark of his own was gone. A profound stillness had settled over him, a clarity that Thorn's cheap taunts couldn't penetrate. He looked directly at the man who had ruined Eleanor's family and tried to destroy his own father. "I didn't do this for her," Caleb said, his voice even and devoid of anger. "I did it for myself. She reminded me of something my father always said, something I'd forgotten, that a man's worth isn't in what he builds, but in the honor he upholds, something you know nothing about." The words landed in the silent room with the force of a final judgment. Thorn's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. For the first time, he seemed to understand that he wasn't dealing with a rival. He was facing a man who had found his soul. Then Eleanor spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it commanded the entire room. She didn't raise it, didn't need to. She slid the file across the table but didn't open it. "Mr. Thorn, this isn't about money. You could offer me every dollar you stole and it wouldn't change a thing. The contents of that file will be sent to the press and the SEC tomorrow morning. But that isn't my victory." She met his gaze, her eyes holding not hatred but a deep, sorrowful pity. "My victory will be rebuilding the Vance name, brick by brick, with honest work and integrity. I will create a business that honors my father's legacy, not by reclaiming his fortune, but by embodying his principles. Your name will be a footnote in my family's story, a lesson on the high cost of a life without honor." They stood up and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving Marcus Thorn alone in his glass tower with the irrefutable proof of his crimes. The silence he was left with was more damning than any accusation. In the elevator, the sterile corporate air gave way to a shared breath of release. Caleb looked at Eleanor, not with pity or admiration, but with a profound, soul-deep respect that he had never felt for anyone before. She met his gaze and offered a small, weary smile that reached her eyes for the first time in a long time. They hadn't just won a battle against a corrupt man. They had forged a partnership built on something more valuable than any fortune. They had reclaimed a piece of themselves, and in doing so, found a future neither could have imagined alone. The story of Marcus Thorn's downfall was not a loud, explosive affair, but a quiet, methodical unraveling. The evidence Eleanor and Caleb released landed in the financial world with the undeniable weight of truth. There were no dramatic headlines, only a series of terse, factual articles in respected financial journals detailing a decade-old fraud. Thorne's empire crumbled not with a bang, but with the silent exodus of investors and the cold, swift arrival of federal investigators. Eleanor never read the articles. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in his ruin, but in her own beginning. With the proof of her family's stolen legacy, she secured a modest business loan, not to reclaim a past fortune, but to build a new future. She founded the Vance Consulting Group, its mission statement a simple promise her father would have recognized: integrity above all else. Caleb, in turn, began a quiet deconstruction of his own life. He watched Eleanor build her firm, not with the arrogance of a mentor, but with the humility of a student, learning a language he never knew existed. He saw how she treated her employees with respect and her clients with unwavering honesty, and it was a revelation. He started dismantling the colder, more predatory arms of his own tech empire, selling off assets that were built on the very principles he now despised. With the profits, he established the Second Chance Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing grants and scholarships to individuals whose lives had been derailed by financial injustice. His old world of cynical rivals and fair-weather friends watched in disbelief, whispering that he'd lost his edge. But Caleb knew he hadn't lost anything. He had finally found something worth holding on to. 2 years later, they stood together at the Foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. The room was nothing like the cold, cavernous ballroom where their story began. It was a smaller, warmer space, filled not with the city's elite, but with a vibrant mix of artists, academics, and the first group of scholarship recipients. The air hummed with genuine conversation and heartfelt laughter. Caleb, dressed in a simple suit, no longer wore a smirk. He wore a quiet, authentic smile as he watched Eleanor at the podium. She wasn't recounting her story of loss, but speaking about the shared human capacity for resilience. She spoke of how dignity is not something that can be taken, only surrendered, and how the greatest measure of success is the ability to help someone else get back on their feet after they've been knocked down. As her speech concluded, the applause was thunderous and sincere. She stepped down from the stage and took Caleb's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture of simple, unspoken partnership. The final speaker of the night was a young woman, the first recipient of the Vance Crest Scholarship, her eyes shining with a future that had almost been stolen from her. In that moment, the cycle of pain had been broken and replaced with a cycle of hope. Caleb and Eleanor weren't just a couple or business partners, they were architects of a new legacy, one built not on inherited wealth, but on shared humanity. Stories like this, where quiet honor rewrites a history of loud injustice, are a powerful reminder of what truly matters. If you agree, please subscribe. Your support allows us to continue bringing these testaments of the human spirit to light.